Sorry about that, folks. Welcome back, everyone. So quite a bit going on right now. You might have seen the news that the California recall is actually taking place as we speak, which we are also live broadcasting. And of course, I'll keep you updated on that if we get anything coming in. But folks, a lot else going on. Of course, New York City has now started its vaccine mandates, where if you want to pretty much use any basic service like going to restaurants or going to gyms and things like this, you need to have your vaccination. But there's a judge now, a federal judge, who has actually blocked part of this for medical workers. And this could very likely be the start of all this, because you now have governors across the U.S. saying they're going to take a stand against it. They're looking for legal challenges they can raise. And if a judge can block it, well, if there's legal issues with it, we can expect more of this to come very soon. Also, as we speak, folks, there's a news story coming out that, well, the Joint Chiefs of Staff head, Milley, General Milley, may have actually been working against President Trump when President Trump was still in office, allegedly alerting the Chinese Communist Party that he would tell them if America was going to launch an attack on the Chinese regime, which could constitute treason, but at the very least constitutes the idea that, well, he was probably working against Trump inside the Trump administration itself. Very bizarre story. We're going to go into these stories, a lot of other ones. I have mentioned, folks, real quick as well, that we are still banned on YouTube with advertisements, which is why we don't have ads, which is why I don't have Super Chat, unfortunately. But we do have our new platform, which is Epoch TV or Epic TV. That's epochtv.com/Crossroads. We have a new series we've been publishing there. You might have seen it. It's called The Dark Origins of Communism. The next episode of that's going to come out soon, which is going to go into a lot of the forgotten history around, well, the Nazis and fascists and how they were actually socialist. You may have heard stories about, yes, they were socialists, and folks, yes, they were socialists. We're also going to go into the origins of Antifa, going back to Anti-Fascist Action, which was a program of the Comintern of the Soviet Union. It's going to be a very interesting episode. Stay tuned for it. That's going to be exclusively on Epoch TV. In the meantime, we also have a bunch of episodes there already viewable. If you don't have an account, all you need to watch it is an email address. So check it out, folks. That's Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads. And I'll show you a quick trailer of what we're doing there now. Then we'll jump into more stories. The narrative of reason was used to launch the Reign of Terror, where at least 40,000 people were beheaded by guillotine. Socialists launched uprisings in France in 1789, 1830, and 1848 before Napoleon III launched his own movement with a coup d'etat. What Marx also did was create a new vision of a communist future, of a society created in the image of man rather than God. Using the promise of an undefined utopia, he justified destruction of all existing institutions, including morality, family, religion, economics, government, and others. Under his movement, Marx united socialist and communist factions across Europe. Although the Paris Commune of 1871 ended, the ideas hatched from France would later be deployed across the globe. All right, folks, again, the next episode of that is coming up very soon. I'll keep you updated on it. But you can find that exclusively on Epoch TV. You can find a link to that in the description and in the chat. So check it out. Again, all you need is an email address to get a free trial if you don't have an account. That said, folks, let's jump into the first story for the night, talking about, well, this federal judge blocking the New York State healthcare worker mandate for vaccinations. And folks, as always, it's a real pleasure having y'all here. Around the halfway point as always as well. Leave your questions. We'll leave your questions. We'll go into questions halfway point. And folks, you're all great here. Elizabeth Valenzuela, you said prayers for the sage. Yeah, now, but I believe you're referring to Larry Elder. Larry Elder's, of course, the main contender for California governor if Newsom gets recalled. And folks, we might find out what's going on with that tonight. We'll have to see. The election is currently ongoing. We do have a live feed broadcasting that. Big show. You said like button, folks. It does still help us if you like the video. I know we mention frequently that we're demonetized and censored, but we assume we can assume that based on algorithms, it still helps the channel if you do like the video. And so we do, of course, appreciate if you do like this video and share it. Lisa Bell, you said, Democrats stop listening to judges. That does seem to be the case. You did see a lot of that going on with governors just saying, especially during the lockdowns, just saying, well, we're not going to listen to the judges. We're going to try to move things anyways, regardless of what's happening. Yeah, a lot going on, folks. Susanna, you mentioned that you believe Larry Elder's going to win. I believe that he believes he's going to win, and we'll have to see what happens. I think things are, I'd say, destabilized enough, and there's enough in flux right now going on with everything that, frankly, just about anything's possible. We'll see what happens. The Democrats are deeming what's happening in California as being more symbolic of a broader shift happening in the United States. And they're viewing it, it seems. Again, you have Biden himself going there to campaign. Kamala Harris was also there campaigning for Newsom. They're trying to prevent Larry Elder from becoming governor. They're regarding this as something that's emblematic of the whole country, and they believe this could in some way impact elections throughout the whole country. And so what's happening in California is pretty serious from that perspective. Dave Johnson, he said, Josh, I try to support you on all platforms. I really appreciate it. All right, folks, that's us. Jump into the first story. Let's talk about what's happening with this judge blocking the New York State healthcare worker vaccination mandate. Now, it says here, a federal judge on Tuesday granted an emergency injunction blocking the state of New York from enforcing a new CCP virus vaccine mandate for healthcare workers. 17 medical health professionals had asked the court to enjoin enforcement of New York's mandate that then Governor Andrew Cuomo announced on August 16th. The mandate required staff at hospitals and long-term care facilities such as nursing homes, adult care facilities, and other congregate care settings be vaccinated for COVID-19 to continue to be employed. The plaintiffs, including doctors, nurses, a medical technician, and a physician's liaison, were facing termination. Remember, folks, listen to the doctors. Listen to the doctors, right? Here you have a whole lot of doctors, medical technicians, physicians, liaisons, others facing termination, nurses, because they don't want to get the vaccine, because based on their medical assessment, they don't think it's good for them. For some reason, they don't want to get it. And of course, there's forces at B are trying to force even medical workers who, based on their medical assessment, say they don't want to get it, trying to force them to get it. Now, they have a lawsuit on this, and basically they face losing their jobs and loss of hospital admitting privileges and the destruction of their careers unless they consent to be vaccinated with vaccines in contradiction to their religious beliefs, specifically on this one, according to the lawsuit. Here, that's folks. So it's your consent. It's your consent. But if you don't do it, you're going to have your career destroyed and your life, basically your whole lifestyle destroyed, and your well-being destroyed, and your religion violated. But it's you can make your own choice, right? You can consent. You can consent to having the government destroy your career, violate your religion, and pretty much destabilize your entire life. But it's your consent. It's important because they believe in consent. Now, it says here, their religious beliefs compelled the plaintiffs to refuse vaccination with the available COVID-19 vaccines, all of which employ aborted fetus cells in their testing. Something to note as well, that if you're against abortion, again, they're saying here that all of the vaccines that they're using for this specifically do have aborted fetus cells used in their testing, development, and production, according to court documents. The healthcare employees argued that the vaccine mandate would nullify protections for sincere religious beliefs under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, even though the prior state health order in effect just days earlier had afforded the same protections. A bit interesting here that is they're making arguments around, of course, around violations of the Civil Rights Act when it comes, ironically, to elections and states saying you have to have an ID of some kind if you want to vote. Remember, the Justice Department is trying to sue states, saying that it violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964 if they require people to show identification, sometimes just a driver's license, to vote, because they're arguing somehow that minorities aren't able to get identification or driver's licenses like white people can, essentially is the argument. But here you see that they're saying that, well, yeah, you can't get a driver's license, but you can go to the hospital and get injected with an experimental drug that probably has aborted fetal cells in some form of its development or production, and it's going to violate your religion and destroy your well-being if you don't choose to get it. But that's not a violation of your Civil Rights Act, they're claiming. But of course, they're bringing this up now and noting that according to the idea of these religious beliefs protections under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, this may actually go against it, these vaccine mandates. And this is even though, again, there's been some stuff on this, so we won't go into it. Now, attorney Christopher Ferreira said this. He said, what New York is attempting to do is slam shut an escape hatch from an unconstitutional vaccine mandate. Thomas More, Society Special Counsel, again, he said this in a statement before the injunction was granted, and he continued saying, and they are doing this while knowing that many people have sincere religious objections to vaccines that were tested, developed, or produced with cell lines derived from aborted children. And again, remember some of the cases on the whole issue of, well, organ harvesting from infants, aka aborted fetal tissues, which they're trying to do it even full term now, which is a fully developed baby at that point. Remember how there were undercover reporters who got information out saying that they were selling baby body parts, and the individuals were silenced, the media attacked them. And then it turned out just recently that, yes, there's a whole market of selling baby body parts, which is one of the big parts, apparently, of abortion, the whole market around abortion, that they're selling parts of babies for things like this, vaccine development and other things. This is, again, one of the big issues that's not being really talked about. It's going to a bit more, though. Now, they're saying that this may violate religious protections. Now, on this, Judge David Hurd of the U.S. District Court for Northern District of New York, a Bill Clinton appointee, granted a temporary restraining order the morning of September 14th in the case. And so based on this granting of a temporary restraining order, the vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in New York is temporarily on hold based on this. Now, the lawsuit was brought against New York Governor Kathy Hochul, the new one. And so it says this as well. This is a quote. This is according to Hurd's order. It says the vaccine mandate is suspended, and also adds that the New York Department of Health is, quote, barred from taking any action, disciplinary or otherwise, against the licensure, certification, residency, admitting privileges, or other professional status or qualification of any of the plaintiffs on account of their seeking or having obtained a religious exemption from mandatory COVID-19 vaccination. In other words, folks, what this means is that if you have religious exemption, if you say that, for example, you're a Christian, or in your belief it's against your belief to kill infants, that it goes against your belief to, of course, be injected with a vaccine that was developed in any way using aborted fetal tissues. And again, that is part of religious exemption. You can say that abortion or the murdering of infants or whatever, on that note, goes against your religious beliefs. You can possibly get a religious exemption from some of these vaccines. And New York City now is putting this on hold based on this. We'll have to see if this is a trend that continues. But again, if it's being recognized for healthcare workers based on religious exemption, it's not going to be hard for other people to file lawsuits and possibly get the same exemption. Now, folks, I want to go into a few more stories. I'm going to go over briefly some else of what's happening with the vaccines and the vaccine mandates, including some of the big protests taking place, including in New York. But first, folks, I've mentioned a few times that we are still totally demonetized by YouTube, but luckily we do have sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by Secure. Now, over 155 million Americans were affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the past year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity, but now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. They can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data centers are hosted in Switzerland, and this is important because Switzerland has the strongest data privacy laws in the world. Secure is also the only private and secure messaging and email app that does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. which means they're not subject to the Cloud Act, which would allow the government possibly to view your data, which any American technology would be subject to an extent. Secure also does not ask for your phone number, does not mine your data, does not upload your contacts like all other applications do. The Secure Messenger functions by adding people you already know and then adding their secure numbers. And you can also chat with people who don't have Secure. All you do is send them an invite. In this way, you are protected from hackers getting into your phone, and you also have full privacy on the app. It costs only $5 for the Messenger and $10 for the email and Messenger package. You can visit secure.com today. That's SEKUR.com for a free 7-day trial. You can also use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off if you want to check it out. And folks, again, big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring tonight's episode. Now, that said, I want to go briefly over a few updates with the vaccines and vaccine mandates. And then I want to go into a few stories, especially what's happening with this General Milley and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, potentially what he's being accused of doing. And I'll go into the details of it. It's a Washington Post book, so take it for what it's worth. And I'll explain some of the issues you have with these, tell-all books and previous issues we've seen with these. But it's possible that Milley may have committed a treasonous act against Trump when Trump was still president. The details of this are not quite clear. And again, the only claim on it is from this book, but I want to go into it in just a bit. First off, though, folks, let's go over some of what's happening with these vaccines and vaccine mandates. And again, also as well, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Or in around 10 minutes, roughly, we're going to go into questions. It says this. First of all, Pfizer is planning to ask regulators for COVID-19 vaccine authorization for young children in October. You might remember in our last episode, I mentioned that one of the Pfizer people on the board of Pfizer, I believe it was, said that they were trying to get FDA approval for giving the vaccine to children. And it seems now that they're saying that they plan to ask regulators to get authorization for children. Now, this means that possibly this means FDA approved or not. They're trying to get regulators to approve it for use on children, meaning maybe you can see schools mandating the vaccine for children 5 years and older, possibly. There have been some warnings against this, including in the United Kingdom, which is important to note, where they actually deemed the risk for children for the virus was low enough that, well, they actually have a higher risk getting the vaccine than in the UK, this was the medical assessment. There was a higher risk of getting the vaccine than there was getting the virus for children because the health risks of the virus tend to be so low for children in general. But in the UK, they're actually pushing it forward regardless of what the medical assessment was. And in in the US now, all across the US, Pfizer is also planning to ask regulators to authorize the vaccine for children. Also on this, the CDC director, Center for Disease Control Prevention, is saying that agencies are urgently working on COVID-19 vaccine for younger children. And so here you have Pfizer saying they're doing it. They're saying they're asking for authorization. The CDC director is saying that their agencies are working urgently to get the vaccine for younger children. Again, in the UK, you have warnings about this, saying it's actually the vaccine itself is more dangerous to kids than the virus, essentially. In the UK, they're pushing forward regardless, despite that. They're trying to push it as well. So we'll see what happens. I'll keep you updated on it. Also, FDA leaders and other scientists are now saying something interesting. They're saying most people will not need the vaccine boosters, which is interesting. And briefly on this, it says an international group of vaccine experts, including officials from the FDA and World Health Organization, said that there is no evidence to suggest that the general population needs COVID-19 vaccine booster shots. Now, take this for what it's worth. I remember Joe Biden not long ago said that he has no plans essentially to mandate the vaccines, and this was not on the plan. Now you have him mandating the vaccine, right? You have seen different officials walk back on statements, and so just because they're saying that the large majority of the population does not need to get the vaccine booster shots does not mean they might not try to mandate it in the future. But they are saying currently that most people don't need the vaccine boosters, which does contradict some other information, including from some of the vaccine manufacturers. And science noting the efficacy of the vaccines dropped significantly, especially with the Delta variant after maybe 3 months. Also on this, folks, a few updates on the mandates. I'll go briefly over these. Governor DeSantis in Florida is now saying local governments are going to face $5,000 fines for imposing COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Also, states are analyzing how to attack, they're saying, Biden's vaccine mandates in court. That's according to the Nebraska governor. Nebraska's attorney general also is working with other attorney generals to challenge Nebraska's attorney general is working with other attorney generals to challenge President Joe Biden's new COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Nebraska's governor said this on Sunday and stated, quote, he's coordinating, this according to Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts, talking about his attorney general, saying he's coordinating with other attorneys general across the country who share similar views about the overreach. Very likely you're going to see a lot of legal challenges coming from states, specifically from the attorney generals, against the federal government's overreach, they're saying, with the vaccine mandates. Also, folks, in New York City, which is a place you wouldn't expect to see this, there are thousands of people protesting against COVID-19 vaccine mandates, again, as they are now pushing these forward in New York City. Also in California, the county sheriff is saying we will not enforce the vaccine mandate. Also, another trend you can wait to watch, in addition to the lawsuits, are just sheriffs saying they're not going to be enforcing it. In California, one of the counties now, the sheriff there is saying they're not going to be enforcing these mandates. Also in Michigan, hospital systems are saying workers with COVID-19 natural immunity don't need the vaccine. And this is an important part of the discussion around antibodies, because if you have antibodies, meaning you've had the virus, you've recovered from it, science, and trust the science, right? They're saying that you have more robust protection based on that. And they're saying that workers at Michigan-based Spectrum Health can avoid the company's COVID-19 vaccine mandate if they can prove they have natural immunity to the virus. They are still recommending the vaccine, but they're saying that if you have, again, you've had the virus and you can show that you have natural immunity from the antibodies, you are not going to be required to get the vaccine to maintain employment there. Also, something interesting in Australia, I've mentioned previously, doctors risk losing their license. In other words, if you are a medical worker and you've gone through all these years of school to get your medical license, you can lose your license if your opinion goes against the established opinion that the vaccines are safe. If you believe the vaccines are unsafe, you risk losing your license in Australia, because they're calling this misinformation. This is from the certifying boards. And it says here, 3 certifying medical boards warn that disciplinary action will be taken against American physicians who disseminate what the boards allege are misinformation and disinformation about COVID-19 vaccines. And based on this, they're saying that if you oppose the vaccines, if you say they're not safe, in Australia, they're saying that's misinformation or disinformation, and you can lose your medical license. And what a way to get consensus among medical workers by threatening to prosecute them, which they're also doing, or threatening to take their licenses away to continue working if their medical opinion says the vaccines are unsafe. And at that point, is it science, folks? Is it science if you can't challenge it? Is it science if scientific argument can't be debated? And frankly, is it medicine at that point if, again, doctors' opinions and your opinion of your physician, your medical assessment cannot be given? Is that then considered still a medical assessment? Or is it dogma? Or is it essentially a state narrative that is overriding science and medicine under the guise of science and medicine? You tell me. Now, folks, I'm going to go into questions in just a bit, but I want to talk what's happening with this General Milley and possibly treasonous statements, depending on how you look at it. These are currently accusations. They're coming from Washington Post and a book from 2 of their reporters. Take it for what it's worth. I'll explain some of the issues with that. But let's go into what was happening when Trump was still president. It says here, General Milley allegedly promised to warn China in case U.S. prepared military strike. Now, folks, if you're a general or in any part of the military for that matter, and you get high-level intelligence that your country is about to attack a foreign adversary, and you make a phone call and you warn your counterpart and the head of the military of your adversary that your country is about to attack them, if you warn them this, what is that called? It's treason, normally, right? And what's the punishment normally for treason? You can be executed for it. Here you have a book now trying to kind of frame this narrative, which is interesting. And oftentimes this is what you do see with these books. I'm not saying these authors are doing this, but sometimes when there's serious accusations, when there's criminal acts taking place in government, what you'll often see is they want to establish the context and narrative of what they did. The context and narrative may not be accurate as it is portrayed in media reports and books, but by doing so, they can essentially avoid investigations by framing it in a certain way. Let's go into what General Milley was doing. It says here, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley promised to warn his Chinese counterpart ahead of time in case the Trump administration prepared a military strike against China, according to an upcoming book by Washington Post reporters Bob Woodward and Roberta Costa. In two secret phone calls with the CCP's military leadership that took place October 30th, 2020, 4 days before the presidential election, and January 8th, 2 days after the Capitol riot, meaning this was before January 6th and then after January 6th, Milley allegedly assured General Li Zhou-cheng of the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese Communist Party's military, that the United States would not strike. And he said he would warn the Chinese in case of an attack, according to excerpts from the book Peril, reviewed by the Washington Post. The October 30th call was allegedly prompted by an intelligence review indicating Beijing suspected the U.S. was preparing a military strike. Woodward and Costa, these two reporters, wrote this suspicion was the result of growing tensions over military exercises in the South China Sea and former President Donald Trump's rhetoric towards China, the Washington Post reported. General Li, it says, I want to assure you that the American government is stable and everything is going to be okay, Milley allegedly told his Chinese counterpart, and he added, we are not going to attack or conduct any kinetic operation against you, kinetic being guns, bullets, jets, tanks, missiles, right? We're not going to use them against you. The book further alleges, and again, take this book for what it's worth. Let's go into it. It says the book further alleges that Milley promised Li, one of the heads of the Chinese military, that he would warn the Chinese in case the U.S. prepared a military strike. You hear that, folks? He warned Li, one of the heads of the Chinese military, that he would tell them if the United States was preparing a military strike. And he emphasized the personal relationship the two officials had established through back channels to the Chinese Communist Party, emphasizing that. He said this allegedly. General Li, you and I have known each other for now 5 years. If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise. Now, the top general allegedly said that. In the January 8th call, Milley allegedly tried to assure Beijing's concerns, assuage Beijing's concerns about potential instability following the Capitol riot as well. Woodward and Costa wrote that Li remained rattled even after Milley assured him of a peaceful transition of power, the Washington Post reported. Things may look unsteady, he said, but that's the nature of democracy. And he said, we are 100% steady. Everything's fine. But democracy can be sloppy sometimes. Milley did not inform Trump about the conversations he had with Li, according to the authors. The book also alleges that Milley called retired Admiral Philip Davidson, then commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and urged him to postpone military exercises in the region. Now, folks, keep in mind some of the context of this. First of all, I've mentioned when you have books written like this, there's two ways these happen. Sometimes it's legitimate investigation by reporters and they're framing information they've come across. Sometimes books are actually meant to frame narratives. Sometimes books are meant to take things that could be incriminating and to frame a broader narrative around it, to put it into context, which is oftentimes, frankly, proven false. As we've seen with a lot of books like Fire and Fury against Trump. Remember a lot of the books attacking Trump? Fire and Fury attacking Trump, where the author admitted that a lot of it was basically fiction. He made a lot of it up. You have this oftentimes taking place. They take information, they try to frame it as a narrative. Sometimes the framing of the narrative just happens to be totally made up. But by doing so, you can incriminate people, or you can make incriminating information appear to be benign. Now, I'm not saying this is what they're doing with this, but you do find that happening a lot of times. And oftentimes what you also have is when a major story is about to drop, they'll call up a friendly media organization, oftentimes whatever the mainstream media on their side of the aisle is, and they'll essentially tell them the story and give the exclusive interview. It'll look kind of bad, but oftentimes not as bad as it could be, were the article to be released into the wild and the narrative were to be interpreted by anybody who looks at the information and draws their conclusions from it. This is one of the ways that they frame narratives. And here you have what does appear to be Milley possibly committing treason. We'll see what happens with this. We'll see if he loses his job over this, and we'll see, frankly, where things go from here. But it's a pretty serious accusation. And again, I'll keep you updated on it. Now, I'll go into a few other quick updates real quick on national security. I'll go over these real quick, and then we'll jump into questions. First of all, folks, when it comes to national security, a top CIA official is now saying that al-Qaeda terrorists are returning to Afghanistan. So not only do you have ISIS, you now have al-Qaeda coming back to Afghanistan. The director of national intelligence, on the other hand, is saying that top terrorism threat right now in the U.S. is not from Afghanistan. She's saying that Yemen, Somalia, Syria, and Iraq for ISIS are the biggest national security threats for terrorism. At the same time, folks, guess what's happening as the Taliban takes power in Afghanistan? The United States is pledging $64 million to aid Afghanistan. They're saying they will not violate sanctions in doing so, but folks, we're giving money to Afghanistan. And oftentimes, as I'm sure you may be aware, there's not a whole lot in place to track where money goes once we give it in foreign aid. Meaning that money, we'll have to see if it gets into the hands of the Taliban or if we can ever prove it, but that is one of the concerns. A top U.S. envoy as well is meeting in Japan over arms talks after North Korea launched a new missile test. Yes, North Korea is coming back on the scenes with missile tests. And the Biden administration, amidst all of these brewing conflicts, is now pulling missile defenses out of Saudi Arabia. One of the main U.S. allies, and remember the Trump administration negotiated peace in the Middle East between some of these major countries, including through Saudi Arabia, and including with Israel between a lot of these countries, Saudi Arabia being one of the main challengers against Iran, and now as China aligns with it on the new triad in that region, which is going to be Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Which is going to be Iran, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Keep in mind that Saudi Arabia would kind of be the counterbalance to that. And so why at this time remove missile defenses from Saudi Arabia? What would the military thinking be to remove missile defenses from a U.S. ally in this region, fighting terrorism set up by the U.S. to fight terrorism, as you have terrorist groups retaking power, and as you have them launching ballistic missiles against certain targets in that area? Why would you do that? Some points to consider, folks. That's us going to some questions for the night. Before we jump into questions, I have mentioned we are still totally demonetized on YouTube. But if you want to support Crossroads, we do have Donor Box. You can find the link in the description below. Which is kind of like Patreon, but not as likely to censor you. And we also do have Epoch TV, epochtv.com/Crossroads, our uncensored video platform. Crossroads is there. A whole lot of other shows are there. We're getting movies. We're getting documentaries. We're getting special features. You can check out some of my special features and documentaries there, and a lot more in the works. And we also have our exclusive interviews there. I'll show you a quick trailer of some of what we're working on over there right now.
Self-defense is great, but that's not the primary purpose of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is to protect us against a tyrannical, oppressive government.
the Second Amendment is under attack. I'd say deeply at risk.
In history, you've seen African Americans actually benefit the most from having gun ownership. It's gun control that's actually been implemented to restrict our freedoms and to oppress us.
What constitutional carry means for gun owners.
Constitutional carry is saying that you don't need to get your government permit to say that you can carry outside of your home or your vehicles. People are sick and tired of the big government overreach. If I want to reconcile the fact that I want to empower myself and other women around me, particularly in college campuses, then I should be an advocate of the Second Amendment.
All right, folks. Again, great interviews over there. That's Antonia Okafor with Gun Owners of America. I kind of like they call themselves a bit more of a grassroots NRA, a bit less into partisan politics, and really one of the frontline groups fighting for gun rights across the United States. There's a very interesting interview over there talking about, protections against Second Amendment, actually some of what's happening with the protections of the Second Amendment that you may not be hearing about. Some inspiring news if you support the Constitution. It's a great interview. Be sure to check it out. Again, epochtv.com/crossroads. That says, jump into the questions for the night. So some of you are saying, sell the tea, Josh. Funny note, my dad keeps trying to get me to start up a tea company. I don't know. Maybe one day I'll get into the tea business. We'll see. That said, tonight's tea is actually a new one I just got. It's a Chinese herbal tea. And actually, I was reading about herbal teas and some of the different types they have out there. And so I'm trying a few right now. I actually can't remember the name of it. It's a Chinese name, but it's actually quite nice. And I've been brewing some kombucha again. You might remember those of you who've been watching Crossroads for a long time, remember I used to drink kombucha just about every episode. When I moved, I actually lost my brewing container, and so I had to get a new one. I have it started up again, so maybe you'll see me drinking kombucha on the show too going forward. All right, folks, that says jump into the questions for the night. First one here is from Seymour Butts. You said, can we get an update on the Arizona audit results? I thought that the results are being presented to the Senate today. They've been pushing forward with it. I have not yet heard a major update on it. I know they're trying to finalize it. One of the problems they have is some of the key parts they need to actually finish. To finish the audit, the investigations they're trying to do are actually being blocked right now. Some of the investigations they're trying to do are being blocked. The local government local government officials in Maricopa County and the voting machine companies are arguing that the state legislature does not have the authority to try to get some of the information they're getting, including, for example, some of the access keys to the voting machines. We'll see if they can get it. We'll see what happens with it. A lot of it's basically kind of gummed up right now. If we do get results, we can go over it, but we're still waiting for some information on that. Timothy Schaefer, you said, question, in OSHA bylaws, that's, again, the Workers' Protection Agency of the federal government, that Biden is using to enforce this law that companies with over 100 employees have to force employees to get vaccinated or get a weekly COVID test. You said in OSHA bylaws, there are a number of violations of their own code and how the standards are to be developed, including employers' rights to object to the secretary's personal motion. Do you see any way for this order to be struck down easily? Frankly, folks, I think when it comes to the Civil Rights Act, as you're seeing already in New York, of all places, is New York. In New York, you have a federal judge temporarily blocking the vaccine requirement for medical workers based on its potential violation of, I believe, Article 7 of the Civil Rights Act. This violates potentially the Civil Rights Act. This violates potentially the Constitution. This violates some of the possible overstepping on the Constitution of the federal government in terms of enforcement, mainly because they bypassed at the very least the legislative branch in passing this as an enforcement arm. Potentially OSHA. I'm not as familiar with the OSHA codes. I do know some, but not well enough to talk about this. But that may be something to consider. I do know that OSHA tends to have stacks of documents where, to not violate OSHA rules, you typically have to have like an OSHA advisor on site at any construction sites and so on. This may be one of the points where over-regulation actually works in favor of the American people, because chances are they might violate some of their own laws in doing things like this. We'll have to see, folks. On that note, in terms of people being able to stand up against it, you do have different governors across the United States. 19 governors on early reports were saying that they were actually going to be opposing the vaccine mandates. And if they can challenge that in the courts, if unions can challenge it in the courts at the local level, frankly, I don't see these vaccine mandates holding up for very long. I'll see what happens with this. I will keep you updated on it. Another question here from Candace Perkins. He said, have you looked into the Fed, the Federal Reserve, I believe you mean, stopped reporting GDP, stopped contributing to pension plans, and the recent letter from Janet Yellen stating that the U.S. will default for the first time in U.S. history? I have not seen these reports, actually, and thank you for bringing them to my attention. I will look into them. Folks, the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor a reserve, but has the ability to print your money, the bills you have in your pocket being Federal Reserve notes, which is, of course, brought into power in the United States on a place called Jekyll Island, where many of these wealthy bank moguls decided to start up a centralized bank, and just so happens a couple individuals who were blocking it magically died on the Titanic, which was being run by one of the main people, of course, who was pushing to have the Federal Reserve created. This organization can essentially bail out banks by using inflation. In other words, banks typically giving predatory loans and so on. Printer go burr, Lisa Bell, you crack me up. All right, let me go into it. Real quick, White Knight, you said Rothschild. Actually, so there are different takes on whether the Rothschilds were present there. Actually, they were. The Rothschild representative at the meeting in Jekyll Island was Mr. Warburg. So yes, they were present through the liaison of Mr. Warburg. A bit of history. Great book on this, Creature from Jekyll Island. I do recommend it. But anyways, I won't go too deep into it. Basically, essentially, the way that the Federal Reserve works, they're essentially set up to try to mitigate financial crisis. But because of the way they work, essentially they can bail out banks. Banks can give extremely risky loans. And basically, if the banks give out risky loans, normally if they don't do well with it, they default, and frankly, they go out of business. Older systems that allowed banks to go out of business if they give predatory or unethical loans kept them from doing things that were unethical or risky with your money. But by making it so that the Federal Reserve can bail them out, they made it so banks can basically abuse you, essentially, with predatory loans and with really risky investments. At the same time, guess how that's paid for? It's paid for by printing money. The Federal Reserve simply hits the on switch on the old printers. More money pops out, inflation goes up, and the value of your money declines, doubling, I believe, every 10 years, was it? Meaning, folks, if you have $10,000 in the bank today, in 10 years, that same $10,000 may be actually worth tangibly about half that amount, which is one of the big problems you have when it comes to your savings getting eaten away without you knowing it through the hidden tax of inflation. It's a big issue, too much to get into here. Maybe in the future we'll do some on it, folks. We'll see. But we'll see. On this, though, I have not heard these latest updates. That is a big deal. I will look into it because the Federal Reserve, I believe, is one of the biggest issues in this country, especially when it comes to, well, taking your money away from you without your knowing it. Question here from Candace Perkins. He said, Josh, have you seen the newest financial information coming from Zero Hedge indicating China is set for a major economic disaster? What is your opinion? I would agree. And frankly, I've been talking about this for a long time. You might remember, even going back to last year, and I know some of you criticized me for this, but let me explain it. I was saying last year, frankly, I thought the CCP didn't have really that long to last, based on the fact they were facing infighting within the Communist Party itself, instability economically as they were getting hit with sanctions. Their high-tech market was basically strangled out because Trump put sanctions on their ability to sell chips and people to sell chips to them, which essentially ended their ability to produce computers, smartphones, cars, anything that requires even some degree of modern technology. CCP can't do it themselves. You had Chinese chip manufacturers like getting into real estate because of that, which is kind of funny. Internal fighting, disasters, social instability. The CCP wasn't looking so hot. Then what happened? The virus hit. The CCP basically ceded the virus to every part of the world by restricting travel in China, but letting people travel outside China. So anyone who wanted to flee the lockdowns had to leave the country, and many of them did, ceding the virus to every part of the world. And the CCP manufactured the whole process of economic lockdowns and basically took the entire global economic system down with them, is what they did. Then they started telling people China's about to bounce back. Economically, things are coming back. And time to invest in China. And foreign investors, especially in the United States, started pouring money into China. BlackRock investment, others. Funny enough, George Soros himself now is actually telling them to stop doing it, and they've stopped. Some interesting developments with this. So basically, the CCP's strength doesn't come from internal right now. Internally, frankly, they're falling to pieces. It's a miracle that the CCP is still standing, to be frank. But they're being propped up through external money, through Wall Street and foreign investment in banks. Funny enough, even U.S. government pensions were being used to invest in China before Trump put a stop to it. All of that was happening, and basically the CCP is being propped up by U.S. money and by, well, not just U.S. money, foreign money, meaning the CCP internally is falling apart, but it's being propped up artificially by external powers, by people who are frankly selling out their interests and selling out their countries and selling out their values to invest in a genocidal, slave-using regime that has no regard for human rights and basically regards the United States, in its own words, as its number one enemy. And well, folks, funny enough, something is happening right now. It's unclear exactly what, but some of these individuals, George Soros himself even, are telling people to stop investing in it. Something's happening. It's unclear exactly what is going on, but even BlackRock investment is pulling money out. Something's going on, and frankly, the CCP can't survive without that external IV drip of foreign investment. And also, frankly, through a lot of friendly politicians who may or may not be getting bought off on a very large scale. Basically, is what is propping up the CCP, and it does seem that something is shaking it up right now. Last question, then I'll go into some more stories. This is from Cameron Bacon. He said, question, Joshua, since the CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, admitted the PCR test can't tell between flu, cold, and CCP virus, which they did, wouldn't that mean vaccines were developed using muddled, incorrect data? Well, remember, folks, that was one of the big accusations that Trump had about numbers of virus cases in the U.S., that basically virus cases were being inflated in the U.S. and basically restricted in places like China. Where you had people who were dying from pretty much anything. If you had the virus and you died from almost any cause, it was called a COVID death. And then you had local governors basically killing people by forcing senior homes to take people who had the CCP virus in, and you had thousands of people killed in New York by Governor Cuomo. Possibly through that regulation, and in many other states across the U.S., where the numbers of deaths were actually being inflated, not by natural deaths or by people catching the virus naturally, but by government intervention, them forcing the most vulnerable population to this virus to take in people who had the virus. And so thousands, tens of thousands of numbers were inflated into the number because of that. A very bizarre stance. And then what do? They use these inflated numbers of, well, weighing cases of deaths based on people dying of any cause as long as you had the virus, of forcing senior homes to take people who had the virus, meaning government intervention was essentially causing infections and thousands of deaths in senior homes. And they're saying now that even those numbers that we know of may be below the actual number. And they even tried covering it up in New York. Remember that? And in addition to this as well, you do have, of course, them admitting that the PCR tests were not able in many cases to even differentiate between the common cold and the flu and the CCP virus, meaning that flu deaths may have even been included within that number. And who knows what else. You're questioning whether that means vaccines were developed using muddled and incorrect data. It's unclear, folks. It is very strange. We can say at the very least that some of the crisis around infection numbers and around deaths may have been inflated through issues like this. We'll have to see. At the very least, what we can say is that the numbers of deaths and the numbers of cases in the United States were used as the number one attack point against Trump during the presidential elections. And so these officials who played up this information, frankly, many of whom were along one particular party line, seem to have used this along that same particular party line to support the candidate of their particular party to become president. And that was used for that. We can say that mixed numbers and messed up numbers were used as part of that. It's a bizarre situation, folks, and we'll see what happens with it. Guess what they're doing now, actually? They're now talking about creating vaccines that can fight not just against the CCP virus, but also against the flu. They want to merge the annual flu vaccine with the CCP virus vaccine. And so remember how you used to get maybe not all of you, but some of you used to get the flu vaccine every flu season? They want to turn the flu vaccine into a mixed vaccine for both the flu and the CCP virus, meaning they're probably acknowledging at this point that this is an annual thing, folks. This is coming back every year probably. And maybe they're going to try to do lockdowns and mask mandates and vaccine mandates every single year at this rate. But they are acknowledging to some extent through that this is going to be an annual thing, probably during flu season. And we're entering flu season. All right, folks, that said, let's go into a few more stories. I want to talk about what's happening with this Justice for January 6th rally. Of course, January 6th was when many people went to the Capitol building and protested against what they saw as being possible fraud in our election. This was, of course, as you had, maybe many people forget because nobody talks about it anymore, but you had the situation where many states actually brought forward dueling electors, meaning that Mike Pence, former vice president, had a choice between which votes he wanted to open. He had the choice to open the votes from the dueling electors. And the American people went, of course, to protest to encourage that to happen, that he would open the votes from the dueling electors. Of course, people entered the Capitol building. Some were a bit rowdy. The only person who was killed was Ashley Babbitt, killed through unnecessary use of force because there were several police officers standing next to her, killed, shot in the neck by an individual who was one of the Capitol guards, who is basically being let off the hook by people who talk about police brutality as being one of the biggest issues in the country. But as that happened as well, many people who were arrested on that day and those who've been charged with it have basically been charged with trespassing, criminal trespassing. But many people have been held to this day in solitary confinement and are still awaiting trial. Let's see what happens with this. But something interesting is happening. There's going to be a big protest on Capitol Hill on the Justice for J6 rally. And as this happens, what is the government doing in Washington? They're again bringing back the Capitol building fencing. These big barbed wire fences to protect themselves from the American people. Let's go to the story. It says here, fencing will be re-erected around the U.S. Capitol this week as law enforcement officials prepare for a demonstration planned for September 18th. Matt Braynard, a former Trump campaign operative, is organizing the rally to call for the release of people who are not accused of carrying out violence on January 6th during Capitol during the Capitol breach, but nonetheless remain in jail. In other words, folks, these are not even people who are accused of violence, but they're being held to this day for entering the Capitol building, and they're still in jail. After briefing members of Congress, Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger confirmed the fencing will be put back up ahead of the rally and said on September 13th, quote, "The fence will go up a day or two before, and if everything goes well, it will come down very soon after." We'll see what happens with this. Now, organizers expect hundreds of people to attend the Justice for J6 event. It could be the largest gathering at the Capitol since January 6, according to Manger, who told us to the Epoch Times in an email, and also said that his agency is closely monitoring the planned event, but that he's confident, given the changes in intelligence gathering and sharing made after January 6th, that the work we are doing now will make sure our offices have what they need to keep everyone safe. Cheers to that, huh? Hear that, folks? They're confident that based on the changes that were made in intelligence gathering and sharing information, not on having people there present to guard the place, but intelligence gathering and sharing, that they're now confident that their officers will have what they need to keep everyone safe. Now, a spokeswoman for the Metropolitan Police Department said via email that the agency will be fully prepared for the coming events. We'll see what happens with this, of course. It's going to be happening again coming up soon, the protest against the people being held who did not commit violence or not even be accused of violence at the January 6th rally, this upcoming protest for that. Now, something interesting is happening, folks. As you have lockdowns taking place across the country, as you have California and New York putting in place, San Francisco and New York City, putting in place vaccine mandates and locking down the cities to a large extent unless you're vaccinated. As you have the Biden administration forcing businesses with over 100 employees to get their employees to either vaccinate or get regular testing for the virus. As you have healthcare workers being forced to vaccinate to risk losing their jobs. As many other things like this are happening, a Democrat strategist on the Democrat side, not the Republican side, a Democrat strategist is now warning. He's saying Biden, Pelosi, they could endure a blowout defeat in the 2022 midterms. This is a warning from a Democrat strategist saying the 2022 midterms, Biden and Pelosi could endure a blowout defeat. Interesting note. This is something they have been saying for quite a while now, and it seems to be the case that these strategists on the Democrat side are continuing to state that, well, the Democrats may actually lose possible control of both the House and the Senate, maybe just the House, but possibly both. Let's go into it. It says here, the marked decline in support for President Joe Biden and his administration nationally and in key swing states indicates that the Democratic Party could endure a blowout defeat in the 2022 midterm elections. Douglas Schoen, who had worked for former President Bill Clinton and was an advisor to Michael Bloomberg's short-lived presidential campaign, wrote in an opinion piece in The Hill this week. The Biden administration in recent days has received significant bipartisan pushback, Republican and Democrat pushback, for how the U.S. military withdrawal was handled, while Biden's announcement last week for new COVID-19 mandates for private employers could face stiff opposition from Republican governors and other entities. Rising inflation, gas prices, and grocery prices could also trigger backlash at the polls. He's saying this, quote, Biden is in a significantly weaker position now than both of his most recent Democratic predecessors, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. At this point in their presidencies, and keep in mind, even Obama lost control of their majority during the midterms. And he's saying this does suggest that the Democrats could suffer even more substantial losses in 2022 than the party did in 1994 and 2010. And keep in mind, the divide, the number of seats they would have to lose for Republicans to gain a majority or even a super majority is not that high. Now, it says here, in Congress, Democrats don't fare much better, Scone warned. Of issue is a budget resolution worth $3.5 trillion, which could bring significant increases in taxes while raising the debt deficit and inflation. And he said the electoral backlash against Democrats could even be more substantial than in both 1994 and 2010. And he was referring to previous Republican wins in Congress. Historically, the president's party loses Senate seats during the subsequent midterm elections. Democrats currently hold a 50-50 majority only because Kamala Harris is a tie-breaking vote when it comes to their hold on the Senate. They also hold a slim majority in the House, although Speaker Nancy Pelosi has previously expressed confidence that her party would retake the lower chamber in 2022. He says Republicans need to pick up just 5 House seats, and redistricting alone, which is, of course, the census came out with new numbers. California and New York, other Democrat strongholds are losing seats, and Republican strongholds are gaining seats because of the people leaving the states and moving elsewhere. Redistricting alone could cost Democrats close to or even more than that number if nothing changes. Further, since World War II, only twice has the president's party gained seats in the midterm elections. Only twice in history since World War II, 1998 and 2002, when both presidents had approval ratings over 60% and even so, saw only meager House seat gains. Scone continued by suggesting the White House and Democrats need to reverse course in order to prevent significant losses in Congress. And he said if the Biden administration continues to push unnecessarily big government spending initiatives and tax increases, along with weak immigration policies and an incoherent foreign policy strategy, this is a Democrat saying this, Democrats could suffer the most substantial midterm loss of any party in recent history. Strong claims, strong statements, and folks, will see what happens with it. At the same time, Senate Democrats are trying to push forward the new election overhaul bill. They now do have Manchin on board with this. He was the one blocking it from happening. If they do pass this, they do need to get Republicans to vote on it, or, because again, it can't get past the filibuster, which requires a 60-vote majority, which they're far from having. This would bring them to 51 votes. Still far from having, unless they were to get rid of the filibuster, which would allow them to change election laws in the United States. This is the new election overhaul bill. Let's go into this just briefly. I know it's getting late, but let me finish on this. It says Democrats in the Senate have won the approval of Senator Joe Manchin, a Democrat, of course, who is actually somewhat moderate. He's been blocking a lot of what the Democrats are trying to do, for a bill that would dramatically overhaul elections. The new legislation combines elements for an election reform bill proposed by Manchin earlier this year. And keep in mind, this is not as strong as it would have been. But it includes reforms proposed by Manchin himself earlier this year with provisions from the For the People Act, S1, the one that the Senate was trying to push before, but Senate Republicans blocked in June. The full text of the new bill is dubbed the Freedom to Vote Act. It has not yet been released, on that note. Democrats are describing it, and this is based on the Democrat description. We have not yet seen it because the full text is not yet released, but Democrats are describing it as focusing on guaranteeing voter access, which is their claim for getting rid of things like voter ID and making universal mail-in ballots. Election integrity, they're saying, and civic participation. Elements we do know of include automatic voter registration, making Election Day a public holiday, requiring states to use voting systems with paper ballots, something I actually don't see Republicans being against, and also implementing changes to redistricting, something interesting because Democrats are set to lose seats in redistricting. Democrats, through this bill they're trying to push through, would actually try to block some of that redistricting that the senators say would prevent partisan manipulation for the process. And so they're trying to change redistricting, which is partisan manipulation. saying they're trying to block partisan manipulation by manipulating natural redistricting. Interesting note, folks. I will be keeping you updated on this as we go forward. A lot is going on in the country right now and around the world. And a lot not just here in the United States and with the 2022 elections coming up and with the virus and with inflation and with just about everything else and with China. But folks, I'll be keeping you updated on all the major stories with all this. Again, I do these live Q&As every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, be sure to check out the interviews we're publishing. We do have pretty longer chunks of them here on YouTube. We do have the full ones on Epoch TV exclusively. We also have our special features over there, one of the latest ones being the Dark Origins of Communism series. I also have a lot of documentaries and more in the process. Frankly, very relevant right now is again the virus origin investigation I did over a year ago, which is investigating the origins of the Wuhan coronavirus, which is still available to watch here on YouTube as well, but also on Epoch TV. Worth watching if you haven't seen it, and worth possibly rewatching even if you've seen it, because frankly, a lot of what we talked about is being proven true, despite earlier accusations. Now, folks, as always, appreciate all of you. Always enjoy doing these. Working on a lot of stuff. Aside from everything you're seeing, I have a lot of good stuff in the works. Looking forward to telling you more about it. I'm working on some investigations and some other good stuff. Good programming in the works. A lot going on. I'll keep you again updated on that. And folks, it's always a pleasure. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.